Match Game was America's favorite daytime show for over a decade. Millions watched every afternoon, laughing at the jokes and loving the panel. But behind the cameras, something darker was happening. Episodes were being erased. Master tapes were destroyed. Contestants were silenced with settlements. And one slip of the tongue in 1974 became the first documented moment a game show host ever sexualized a contestant on live television. The network buried it for 13 years. When it finally leaked, people couldn't believe what they heard. What else did they hide? The answer is worse than anyone expected. Gene Rayburn stepped onto the Match Game set on June 12, 1974, thinking it would be another easy recording day. The energy in the studio felt light, the kind of afternoon where jokes carried across the stage without effort. So when he welcomed contestant Karen Lesko at about 1 minute and 45 seconds into the taping, everyone expected the usual charm. Instead, something slipped out of him so fast that even he looked startled. He smiled, leaned forward, and said with a warm tone that drifted off too casually as he added, "You know, John. Does she have pretty nipples?" Then he froze and stumbled back into the moment with pretty dimples there. The crew gasped. Some people laughed out of shock. The audience clapped without knowing what else to do. Rayburn forced a smile and tried to correct himself by pointing to her cheeks and repeating that this woman had very pretty dimples. But the damage was done, and the studio felt the air tighten all at once as the director buzzed him off air. That moment became the first time a game show host was ever documented sexualizing a contestant on set, even though the world wouldn't hear about it until much later. The producers never let that clip reach television. They pulled the segment, cut it apart, and replaced the introduction with generic footage from earlier tapings. It was a splicing trick they relied on again and again that season, 47 times according to fans who tracked every edit. They were determined to keep anything risky away from broadcast screens. The footage stayed locked away for almost 13 years. Then, in 1987, a crew member leaked it, and everything that had been hidden rushed into the fan community. It became the show's most infamous blooper, and people talked about how long the network spent trying to bury it. More than 30 years of suppression only made the clip even more legendary. Karen Lesko later explained in a 2005 forum that Rayburn did apologize to her in private. She said he seemed embarrassed, but then joked about it backstage like it was nothing. That detail painted a picture of the era more clearly than anything else. On those sets, behavior like that wasn't treated as serious misconduct, but as humor that everyone was expected to shrug off. It echoed the broader entertainment culture of the 70s, where public apologies were enough. Private jokes softened everything, and no one was truly held accountable. Even though the clip never aired, the story grew into a symbol of how casually women were spoken to, and how easily shows brushed aside what should have been taken seriously. Once the leak spread through trading circles, the conversation around Rayburn's slip kept growing. Fans swapped copies, passed around audio recordings, and posted early discussions in online communities when the internet arrived. The more it circulated, the clearer the tension became between how polished the show looked on air and what actually happened behind the cameras. It left a mark on Match Game history, showing how different the backstage reality could be from the cheerful daytime tone that viewers saw at home. Months before that infamous moment, the show had already collided with a different controversy. On August 3, 1973, during Match Game 73, Episode 90, Brett Somers was handed a fill in the blank prompt that read, "He put the cigarette out on his blank." Somers answered with a fag, using British slang for cigarette. She said it as casually as anyone who grew up hearing it in another country would. But the moment stunned the studio. Crew members panicked. the floor director halted the taping. CBS had actually approved the episode before filming. Yet, when the word echoed through the room, confusion and fear followed so quickly that producers made an instant decision to pull the episode. American viewers were unfamiliar with that meaning, and the word read as a direct slur. The misunderstanding destroyed the episode's future. It never aired again. According to fan accounts, the master tape was destroyed under the Goodson-Todman rule that banned anything considered problem content. That decision turned the lost episode into one of the earliest examples of censorship shaped by shifting cultural sensibilities. The ripple effect didn't stop there. That episode remained banned from reruns on GSN and Buzzer from 1996 all the way to 2025. Networks claimed modern sensitivities and advocacy from groups like Glayad as the reason. Buzzer confirmed in 2023 that the episode would stay off-air permanently. The fallout created a precedent, and networks began removing additional episodes for similar reasons. 19 more were pulled. Analysts estimated that networks lost around $2.4 million in rerun revenue because match game reruns had always been dependable moneymakers. But once the ban spread, that revenue thinned out. In a 1974 interview, Brett Summers defended herself by explaining that fag was British slang and not intended to insult anyone. She grew up with the word used in its original meaning and genuinely didn't expect backlash. But producers had already moved past her explanation. With pressure rising and culture shifting, they classified the episode as offensive and erased it from the syndication list forever. It became a talking point in discussions about how language changes over time and how television chooses what history to keep. Some argued that context should have been preserved. Others believed removing harmful language was the right step. The debate lingered because no one could deny the tension between historical accuracy and cultural responsibility. Fans tried to fill the gap. People recreated the missing episode from memory. Others used scraps of footage or audio that survived in corners of the internet. Match game historians analyzed every detail they could find, especially when someone shared a clip where Rayburn gave a nervous laugh right after Summers' line. That moment never appeared in any official archive because the master tape was gone. Only fan edits and bootleg recordings remained. The mystery around the episode turned it into a cult topic among collectors. It showed how censorship sometimes erased pieces of television history that could have helped future viewers understand past culture more fully. The financial fallout from these decisions stacked up over time. By the end of it, networks had skipped 19 more episodes for controversial content. The losses added up. Syndication analysts kept pointing to that $2.4 million figure because it highlighted how sensitive episodes could reshape an entire show's rerun value. Match Game stayed popular, but gaps appeared everywhere in its archive. Those missing pieces formed part of the show's legacy, as much as any joke ever did. Then there was another moment from 1973 that nearly vanished completely. On September 17, 1973, during Match Game 73, Episode 109, Charles Nelson Riley heard the fill-in-the-blank question, "His tie was so blank, it offended everyone." And he responded with queer. Riley was already known for his flamboyant humor and playful boundary pushing. But that answer came too early for the television standards of the time. CBS responded fast. The episode aired once and then disappeared. By 1975, the entire 25-minute tape was removed from the vaults. Internal memos talked about viewer complaint risk. And unlike other episodes where producers added an oops overlay, they didn't patch this one. It simply vanished. Riley later wrote in his 1978 memoir that the moment was too far ahead of its time. He meant it honestly, but the network didn't see it that way. Years passed before anything surfaced again. In the early 90s, a poor-quality VHS bootleg of the episode showed up among tape traders. It revealed Gene Rayburn's discomfort and a sudden cut to commercial right after the answer. That shaky footage became the only remaining proof that the episode existed. Collectors and fans kept it alive. It turned into a reminder of what networks were willing to erase in order to protect their image. It also gave LGBTQ advocates something important to point to in later conversations about representation. GLAAD cited the incident in a 2010 report as an early example of media erasure, showing how queer content was not just ignored but actively removed. The episode carried more weight because Charles Nelson Riley himself lived through the tension between public silence and private honesty. He was open in his personal life, but rarely allowed to reflect that identity on screen. His answer, even if playful, touched a nerve in an environment where anything queer was quietly trimmed away. That was why the tape's disappearance became more than a quirky story. It became part of the long timeline of how queer representation moved forward in tiny steps and often got pushed back just as quickly. On April 18, 1975, something happened on Match Game that people still whisper about. Episode 443 rolled along like any other taping, and then the question came out. The moment Gene Rayburn read it, the panel froze for half a second, then burst into loud, uncontrollable laughter. Richard Dawson leaned back in his chair. Brett Somers nearly fell forward from laughing too hard. The room felt wild. But the joke didn't just cross a line. It blew straight through it, and everyone in the studio seemed to sense it while still laughing anyway. The executives watching later didn't share that feeling at all. They called the content unacceptable and ordered the episode pulled before reruns even started. They pushed so hard that people inside the studio later said the master tape didn't survive the week. Fans would talk for years about how this was the first time a 1970s game show episode had been erased completely because of offensive content. Even today, Buzzer's logs label it as permanently unavailable, almost as if the episode never existed. Yet people still bring it up because other episodes from the same era had jokes in the same spirit, only those were covered with whistles or sound effects. This one aired raw during the taping, and that rawness sealed its fate. Right after the taping ended, Dawson's laughter had been so loud that it drowned out Gene's buzzer. Brett Somers said later that she thought the moment was hilarious and worth remembering. But once the executives stepped in, the tone flipped fast. They called the joke career-ending and warned people never to mention the episode again. The backlash came so quickly that no one had time to defend anything. Some fans noticed years later that other episodes with similar jokes survived, but only with censor overlays or audio cuts. They studied the patterns and realized this one stood alone. When a copy leaked onto YouTube in 2022, it was demonetized within hours and quickly flagged by networks as if time hadn't changed anything at all. The whole situation kept growing in fan circles and sparked long discussions about where comedy ends and censorship begins. It also revealed how carefully networks protect their archives, even when decades have passed. That single missing episode kept shaping the show's legacy. People in TV history circles still use it as an example of how fast a moment can shift from funny to forbidden. The fact that a master tape was destroyed turned it into something almost mythic. Buzzer's 2024 log, listing it as permanently unavailable, made the mystery feel even deeper. Whenever short clips pop up online, they disappear just as quickly, reminding everyone that networks still guard certain pieces of the past. This one episode sits in that strange space where legend meets policy, where humor meets changing culture, and where a single question changed what future producers dared to do. Around the same time, Richard Dawson was causing a very different kind of conversation. In 1973, during the first 10 episodes of Match Game, he kissed 14 female contestants. It became such a pattern that ABC executives started paying close attention. By March 1974, they sent out an internal memo demanding that the kissing stop immediately. They were worried about propriety and the unpredictable reactions of sponsors. The concern wasn't just moral. Rumors began to jump from studio to studio about health risks. Some fans whispered that Dawson could spread diseases, including herpes, which carried a heavy stigma in the 1970s and grew even more serious as the AIDS crisis emerged in the coming decade. By 1975, a crew whistleblower claimed that contestants were being given mouth swab tests before taping. The assistant conducting the tests allegedly stood with a cotton swab and magnifying glass, checking one contestant after another. Dawson denied that the tests were mandatory and said only that he had given 14,000 kisses in his career. Still, the tension between routine affection and health concerns pushed producers into new territory. It became one of the first times a TV host's on-air habits forced a studio to consider health and safety rules. The story kept growing. Viewers sent letters. Newspapers weighed in. Then ABC tried something surprising. They launched a viewer poll in 1975, asking if Dawson should continue kissing contestants. The poll gathered roughly 200,000 responses, and 92% said yes. The network had no choice but to let the practice continue, and Dawson's on-air kisses became a permanent part of his persona. But time kept moving, and by the late 1980s and early 1990s, the mood had shifted. Workplace rules had become stricter. Sexual harassment lawsuits were increasing. Studios grew more cautious. So when Dawson returned to Family Feud in 1994, the contract included a new rule. No more kissing. Not on the cheek, not on the lips. His daughter reportedly played a major role in convincing him to accept the change. The moment marked the end of a 21-year controversy and showed how different television had become. Even earlier, back in 1973, Dawson crossed another line on October 12th when he kissed Summers during a Match Game episode and lingered for 7 long seconds on her cheek. The moment seemed playful on set, but it made viewers uneasy. When the show entered syndication, that kiss was removed completely. It stood as one of the clearest examples of how the show walked right on the edge of what people were comfortable seeing. It also showed how networks tried to protect their image by editing even the smallest moments when they felt the mood was too intimate. Match Game kept stretching boundaries, and sometimes the pushback came from inside the studio itself. In June 1974, producer Mark Goodson sent Gene Rayburn a note called Memo 47. It told Gene to stop making jokes about breasts and nipples, especially after a recent wardrobe slip by a panelist had caused chaos. The memo was sharp and direct, and it came just a few days after the incident. It showed that even though the show thrived on risque humor, producers were growing nervous about daytime TV limits. The note later became famous among fans and was often quoted as proof of how wild the show's energy had become. By the 1974 season, the producers had created a system to keep the show funny without letting it get out of control. They used something called oops overlays. These little graphics popped up over a panelist's face whenever their answer was too risque to show. That year alone, they used 52 overlays. 18% of all panel answers had to be covered. Charles Nelson Riley and Brett Summers caused most of them, since they were known for giving the wildest answers. The overlays became a signature part of the show. They let the cast go right up to the line while keeping the networks happy. The producers even designed the panel layout to help control the show's tone. Casting notes from 1973 revealed that seat number 4 was labeled the dummy slot. This seat usually went to someone who played a ditzy blonde, offering silly or clueless answers. The producers believed this helped balance the panel and brought in more male viewers. Fannie Flagg and Betty White often filled that role, giving goofy answers that contrasted with sharper jokes from the rest of the panel. It was a carefully planned piece of the format that made the show unpredictable. Behind the scenes, things could get even wilder. Tapings often ran 12 hours with up to 5 episodes filmed back-to-back. Long days like that led to drinking, especially among panelists and crew. Records from 1975 listed 23 alcohol-related incidents, from panelists arriving tipsy to crew members passing out backstage. The mix of pressure, long hours, and a party-like atmosphere created constant bloopers. Many of these moments became famous stories told years later in interviews. They shaped the idea that Match Game wasn't just a show. It was a chaotic world of its own. By 1976, the producers felt the pressure to tighten things up. Mark Goodson made the tough call to blacklist 3 panelists for ad-libbing jokes that were too dirty even by the show's standards. He replaced them with safer celebrities who were less likely to shock the audience. The shift was noticeable right away. The humor softened. The edges got smoother. Some fans say the show never felt quite the same after that. But the decision helped the show survive, as network rules grew stricter year after year. The moment Gene Rayburn stepped into 1986, he was still hopeful. He had spent years carrying Match Game with a kind of charm that felt natural. And when talk of a revival began, he let himself believe the door was opening again. But everything shifted the day Entertainment Tonight aired a cheerful segment for his 69th birthday. It played across the country, showing his smile and reminding viewers of his long history on television. And while fans loved seeing him, executives saw something else. They saw his age. Gene later wrote in a private 1987 letter that the segment killed the revival. He believed that the moment people were reminded he was almost 70, the industry quietly backed away. Even his daughter Lynn said later that everything changed after that broadcast. Suddenly, calls were not returned. Meetings disappeared. Work dried up. Ageism wasn't a rumor to him. It was a wall that rose in front of him almost overnight, and it pushed him out of the space he had helped build. Years moved on, and by 1990, Match Game returned without him. Gene was 72 and still wanted to be part of it. His voice, his timing, his warmth, all of it was still there. He called the producers again and again, hoping for a chance to stand where he once stood so easily. Bert Convy, who co-hosted the show, later admitted Gene had called at least 17 times. Each call was dismissed. The reason always circled back to his age. They wanted someone younger. They wanted to chase a demographic that executives believed wouldn't connect with a host who had been beloved for decades. But the decision had consequences the network didn't expect. The revival stumbled. It lasted just 1 season and cost $12 million. Analysts blamed the failure on the absence of the one man who had defined the show. Audiences felt the disconnect at once. Without Gene, the spark that made the show special was gone. The story turned even more painful that same year. In April 1990, Bert Convy learned he had a terminal brain tumor. He knew he couldn't continue, and his first instinct was to ask the producers to let Gene replace him. He begged them to do it. He knew Gene wanted it. He knew he deserved it. But executives refused. They talked about viewer youth demographics again. They insisted that bringing back an older host would hurt the show. Their refusal denied Convy's final wish and cut deep into Gene's already wounded hope. It showed how strongly the industry clung to youth, even when loyalty and legacy were placed right in front of them. Almost a decade later, in October 1999, Jean walked on stage to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. It should have been a joyful moment, but his speech carried a quiet bitterness. He spoke of networks forgetting old talent. He talked about being pushed aside, about watching his relevance fade not because he had changed, but because the industry decided he was too old. Those listening could feel the weight behind his words. It was the truth of someone who had given decades to his craft, only to be told that experience no longer mattered. 1 month later, on November 29, 1999, he passed away at 81, leaving behind a career that had shaped television and a final message about how easily that same industry let him go. Even after his death, more pieces of the story kept surfacing. Fans and researchers uncovered a pattern of choices that shaped the show's legacy in surprising ways. Leaked logs from Buzzer in early 2025 revealed that 7 episodes from 1973 were permanently skipped in reruns because of answers containing slurs like fag or queer. One episode taped on July 26, 1973 stood out. Brett Somers had answered fag in a fill-in-the-blank question. The moment caused the episode to be banned by GLAAD and kept off Buzzer and GSN forever. For decades, no one outside the network knew why these episodes vanished. When the information came out in 2025, fans were stunned. It showed how quietly networks handled controversial language from older broadcasts and how entire pieces of television history could be removed without explanation. Then there was the lost episode from the 1975 season. It featured a wardrobe malfunction that became one of the strangest legends among longtime viewers. During taping, contestant Karen Lesko's outfit shifted, revealing her nipple for a split second. It never made it into any official airing, but the uncensored moment remained in the master tape. Fans whispered about it for years until staff confirmed that CBS eventually ordered the tape destroyed so the footage could never spread. That destruction turned the unaired episode into one of the most talked-about lost pieces of match game history. In 1998, Julio shook the show in his own way. On a Match Game PM episode taped on September 21st, he gave an answer involving the word genitals. Producers bleeped it 4 times in the broadcast version, leaving fans curious about the real line. For decades only the censored audio existed, but in 2025, a full uncensored tape leaked in a private torrent. Fans finally heard the raw answer, which turned out to be so explicit that the original censors had no choice but to cover it. The moment instantly became one of the wildest censored exchanges the show ever had. There were moments behind the scenes that never made public lists either. An internal CBS memo from 1976 described 3 separate incidents where contestants groped Gene Rayburn during taping. His gentle and friendly style sometimes invited behavior that crossed lines, and executives acted quietly. They sent him to mandatory sensitivity training, instructing him how to set boundaries while still keeping the show light. The memo stayed hidden for decades until fan researchers discovered it. It painted a picture of a show struggling to manage the mix of flirtation, humor, and real human behavior that spilled over during its peak. Another quiet scandal came from episode 137, which aired on January 25, 1974. A joke between Richard Dawson and Brett Somers referenced a rumored off-screen affair between them. The broadcast bleeped the joke for 12 seconds, which only sharpened fan curiosity. In 2025, archivists uncovered the unedited audio and confirmed what had been whispered for years. The joke was indeed about their relationship. Once again, a moment intended for laughs became a piece of hidden history that lingered long after the cameras stopped. Karen Lesko, the same contestant involved in the earlier wardrobe issue, spoke out years later. In a 2005 interview, she said Jean's public apology over the famous Pretty Nipples blooper felt insincere. She explained that backstage, the teasing from crew members continued all day. She remembered feeling isolated and humiliated, and no one from production ever checked on her. The show reshot parts of the episode, but the impact stayed with her. Fans kept referencing the blooper for decades, while she carried the emotional weight of being turned into a punchline. Another story from 1974 surfaced about a female contestant who threatened to sue after Richard Dawson's signature kiss left a bruise on her face. The network moved fast. They settled quietly, paid her, and asked her to sign a non-disclosure agreement. It became one of the first signs that some of Dawson's on-air affection carried risks, and insiders whispered about it for years. By 2010, more private material appeared when an excerpt from Brett Summers' 1977 diary was published. She wrote about feeling pressured to deliver dirty talk to boost ratings. She explained that writers encouraged her and other panelists to make racier jokes, and if ratings dipped, producers blamed them. She felt trapped. She knew the show expected her to keep crossing lines, and she stayed because her job depended on it. Her words offered a rare look at how performers were pushed to shape the show's tone, even when it made them uncomfortable. A similar feeling came through in a 1982 letter from Charles Nelson Riley. He admitted that the panelists often pushed boundaries on purpose. They relied on censorship rules to protect them, knowing the censors would only cut the most explicit content. He described how they experimented with double meanings and celebrated whenever a bold joke slipped past. It showed how much strategy went into the show's humor. It wasn't just spontaneous. It was a game of how far they could go without triggering the scissors. Then came a wave of revelations in 2023. Former crew members on TikTok described after parties where heavy drinking was encouraged. They talked about 5 separate incidents where models faced unwanted advances, and none were reported. Complaints were brushed aside. Victims were told it was part of the job. Hearing these stories made it clear that the issues behind the scenes went far beyond what viewers saw. It showed a culture shaped by silence, pressure, and a drive for entertainment at any cost.